Good evening and welcome to Guardian Australia's 10th birthday celebrations. I'm Gabrielle Jackson, I'll be your host for this evening, and I'm the Associate Editor for Audio and Visual at Guardian Australia. I also host the newsroom edition of our daily news podcast, Full Story. We're in for a fun night, and to kick us off, it's my pleasure to introduce Auntie Norma Ingram, who'll perform the Welcome to Country for us this evening. Auntie Norma is a Wiradjuri woman who was raised on the Aboriginal reserve at Cowra. She moved to Gadigal country when she was 11 and has lived here ever since. She's a community elder and an esteemed educator. She was the first Aboriginal Australian to graduate from Harvard University, and she did so with a master's degree in international and comparative education. She's worked for decades to share her knowledge in order to cultivate a greater understanding of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures across wider society. Please join me in welcoming Auntie Norma Ingram to the
Yamadumarang, you and do, Auntie Norma Ingram, Gale Wiradjuri Yina. How is everybody this evening coming out in this cold weather? Good? All good? Thank you. So I'm Norma Ingram, or Auntie Norma Ingram, and the Aboriginal Cultural Protocol, respectfully, we call our elders either aunt or uncle, as the case may be. So I am a Wiradjuri woman. Some of you may know Midwest New South Wales, the Lachlan River, or the Gallia River. I was born and raised on the Aboriginal Reserve there under the Aboriginal Welfare Act, where our lives were totally controlled by state governments. So this is right across Australia. I'm freshwater and my totem is the goanna. But I came down to Sydney with my mother as the youngest to Redfern and Newtown, which is Gadigal country. So I'm so proud that I now live on Gadigal country. So the Gadigal is one of 29 small clan groups of what we recognise as the Eora Nation. So the Eora Nation is bounded by 3 rivers, the Hawkesbury, the Nepean and the Georges River. They do have Aboriginal names. I was reading, I'm sorry about this, you newspaper people, I'm so sorry about this, but I do read Facebook from time to time because I have to know when my family's birthdays are. It pops up. But I was reading on Facebook and they said, did you know that these rivers and mountains and everything here in Australia had Aboriginal names? Exactly. We've been here for 65,000 years. The English have been in, they came in the tall ships over 200 years ago. What do you think we were speaking before the English came and gave us that language? And so these are small things, and some may think they're kind of, really trivial, but they're not to us. Because what we do, and I welcome you to country, excuse me, as an Aboriginal elder, and I'm a chairperson of our Aboriginal Elders program in Redfern, what I do by that as an Aboriginal elder, I am opening up myself to you. I really am making myself vulnerable, because I'm not just saying, welcome to country, the land. I'm saying, welcome to Mother Earth. I'm saying, welcome to our culture. Welcome to my heart and soul, because this is who I am. I'm an Aboriginal woman. Do not ask me to walk in a room and leave my Aboriginality out the door, because that's not going to happen. So today, being on Gadigal country, they are saltwater. Their totem is the whale, the gurrul, and they are sunrise people. So right across this land, we have over 200 different Aboriginal nations. North to south, east to west. Yeah, Tasmania's a part of that. Sorry, I don't mean to offend anybody about that, but Tasmania is extremely part. And of course, we do acknowledge our Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters and family up the north. So when we look at that, we think about that, and I want to acknowledge all of those beautiful, beautiful Aboriginal countries. We don't have tribes, my friends. We have nations or we have language groups. And if only I could just say to you, when you go away Just think about that. But I also like to leave you with something else too. What Aboriginal country were you born on? What Aboriginal country do you live on now? So these are just small things that we ask you to think about and to do. So we are 3% of the Australian population at the moment. That means, in my calculations, there's 97% of all other Australians or all other people who now call themselves Australians, whether their ancestors came across in those tall ships right up until whether they're just recent. But we have to walk together. We have to work together. We've been here for over 65,000 years. We have continued to practice our culture. We have continued to have that connection with our land, with Mother Earth's family, the animals, the plants, and each other. And we will continue to share our stories and to share our culture with you. But we need you to play your role as well in all of this as we continue to walk these ancient lands. We do that. And I was just thinking backstage, The Guardian, that's print media. We have been sharing our stories and telling our stories for 65,000 years in just wonderful ways, with our stories, with our songs and our songlines, our art, our dances. We're teaching you and we're telling these stories, not just to Australians, but right around the world. We're doing it all the time. Whether it was in the sand, whether it's on the body art, whether it's on canvas, we will continue to tell you those stories and share your stories. I'm an educator as an Aboriginal elder, and as an Aboriginal elder, I have a responsibility to share our stories. So I want to acknowledge our elders, our Aboriginal elders, Torres Strait Islander elders, but I want to acknowledge elders of other Australians, because with that rich world that we have here now in Australia, there is so much for us to share. It is so important for us to share our Aboriginal stories, but I think it's also important for you to share your stories as well, to make up who we are as Australians. So continue to do that. And I say to elders, whether it's our Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander elders or whether it's your elders, we also have to teach the next generation, because we need our leaders. We need our future leaders. We need our future elders, but they're not going to do it on their own. They have to listen. Ningana, as we say. Yinjamara is respect, so they have to listen with respect. But we also have a role and responsibility too. So it's important to acknowledge our elders, and we walk in their footsteps. We are privileged because we walk on at their footsteps on this ancient land. So we need to tell Mother Earth that we're here to protect her so she can protect us. We need to continue to do that. So I just want to welcome you all to Gadigal country, walking on these sacred lands. My ancestors, my old elders who have passed on, they walk with me. And that's what it's all about. When you're walking on these ancient lands, you are protected. You really are protected by our elders as you do that. But you have to really totally believe in it. So I've given you some instructions. Find out what land you're on. Also, when you get out there, if you look down here, it's tar and cement. When you get out there, where you can, we have that possibility. Take off your shoes, socks, stockings, whatever. Stand on Mother Earth. Stand on the sand. Stand in the water. Stand on the grass. Stand on Mother Earth and just feel her power. And just say Yinjamara with respect. So enjoy your evening. I know the Guardian's just, a decade of making a difference? Still got a little way to go, hasn't it? Little way to go. But I just want to leave that with you. So welcome everybody, and just remember, 65,000 years that we've been practicing, we have never ceded our sovereignty. We will continue. So always will be Aboriginal land. So let's join and walk together and work together as family. So welcome everybody. Thank you.
What a wonderful welcome. Thank you so much, Auntie Norma Ingram. We're so excited that we've reached 10 years, and there are some really important people in the room today who've made an enormous contribution, be they writers, commercial and philanthropic partners, our dedicated supporters and subscribers. From our very first days, Guardian Australia worked with some of the country's best writers, and some of our longest standing contributors are here tonight. We're delighted to see you all. I can't actually see you all, but I know you're here, and we are so grateful that you are. We would not be here without you. We also wouldn't be here without our other audience members and those joining on the live stream, you, our readers, writers and listeners. Hearing from and collaborating with readers is at the heart of what we do. So tonight, we're going to ask you to take part. If you all get out your phones, we have an audience interaction tool that you will need your phone to use. And you can do this at home if you're watching on the live stream or if you're here in the audience. If you just enter via that QR code and you will be able to access the tool. If you can't do it from the screen, you'll have a piece of paper in your tote bags if you're in the audience. Later this evening, there'll be a chance for you to ask questions to Lenore Taylor and Katharine Viner. But to start off, we want to know how you feel about this past decade. I know that might be a dangerous thing to ask, but we want you to put one word that you think describes the last decade into the tool. But I have to warn you, there's a swear filter. Now, we're working with one of the Guardian's trusted partners, Essential Media, for this interactive tool. So in terms of privacy, you can rest assured your details will be safe and nothing will be kept. You do not have to enter your real name, but please keep it clean. This is a family show. And I hope you have all got it now, have you? Yeah? And there we go. Tumultuous, turbulent, all quite creative words without swear words. But I'm not surprised to read any of those words. But that was just a warm-up, so you could see how to use the tool. Now we have a quiz. Of course there's a test. And have you been paying attention? The answers will be on your phone screen. You just have to tap the right answer, and the quicker you do it, the more points you get. Let's go. I hope you're not competitive. Question 1. Who won the first Bird of the Year poll in 2017? Was it A, the magpie, B, the black-throated finch, C, the ibis, also affectionately known as the bin chicken, or D, the superb fairy wren? Okay, well, there's another question I'll ask. Is it fixed now? Everyone has voted. Yes, what a clever audience. It was the magpie. It was very, very close, but the magpie was pipped the ibis at the post with a little help, it has to be said, from the Collingwood Football Club, which I don't think is very fair. The endangered black-throated finch won in 2019, and the superb fairy wren won in 2021. My money's on the sulphur-crested cockatoo for this year. I think the naughty bird's time has come. Now, question 2. How many Prime Ministers appear in Guardian Australia's 10th birthday video? You may have seen it playing as you came in. Were you paying attention? Was it 0, 1, 5 or 6? We just did this to see if you were paying attention, obviously. It was all planned. Now, is everyone ready for the third question? Are we ready for the third question? That should be the question. What is the name of the climate denialist character in First Dog on the Moon's cartoons? Is it A, Ian, B, Brenda, C, Snitty, or D, Fiona? Ooh, that was close. First Dog. The answer is Ian, the climate denialist potato. He first appeared in 2014 when Greg Hunt was the Environment Minister. He did go on to become a senator and was even appointed Environment Minister in the Morrison government, but he has been kicked out. The other characters are, of course, my favourite, Brenda, the civil disobedience penguin, Snitty, the cephalogical cassowary, and Fiona, who is sometimes the unemployed bettong and sometimes the precariously employed bettong, depending on her circumstances. Now, question 4 has some audio, so you'll have to listen out. But the question is, which TV show did this line appear in?
Do you know who I just got off the phone with? The Guardian, Emery. The Guardian.
Was that from Neighbours, Home and Away, Heartbreak High, or Bluey? The majority got it right. Congratulations. It was the global hit Heartbreak High. Now, the final question for the quiz is this. What has not been said to a Guardian Australia journalist by a politician in a press conference? Is it A, calm down, B, The Guardian, one of my favourite publications, I just don't think you're very bright, or if I were you, mate, I'd hide my face and never appear again? Ooh, okay. Well, the correct answer is actually D, which Paul Keating said to the Sydney Morning Herald journalist Matthew Knott earlier this year. But the others, it was Tony Abbott told our opinion editor Bridie Jabour to calm down, which was one of Guardian Australia's first viral moments. The hashtag calm down Bridie trended for days, and maybe Bridie even started that hashtag. Peter Dutton told Daniel Hurst, our Foreign Affairs and Defence correspondent, that The Guardian was one of his favourite publications in 2022. He did quickly clarify that he was being sarcastic and then called us trashy, but he did say that. And Clive Palmer, in trying to avoid a question from, again, our fabulous Bridie Jabour, about whether he had said Jackie Lambie was not very bright, he said to Bridie, "I just don't think you're very bright." She tells me she took it as a compliment. So who got 5 out of 5, be honest? No one? Oh, someone. Oh, you're Guardian staff though. Did anyone who is not Guardian staff get 5 out of 5? Well done. They were pretty hard, I thought. Now, don't put your phones away because we will be using them again. The Guardian came to Australia in 2013, not for fun, although, gosh, we have had some, and not because the news organisation was on a mission to expand. It came because some very smart people in this country were worried about the state of journalism here and where it was headed. The Guardian has a purpose, and it was that purpose that attracted people like Lenore Taylor and Katharine Murphy. In her agenda-setting 2017 essay, A Mission for Journalism in a Time of Crisis, Guardian Australia's founding editor, Katharine Viner, wrote about the history of Guardian's journalism and its mission for the future. Our moral conviction, she wrote, rests on a faith that people long to understand the world they're in and to create a better one. We believe in the value of the public sphere, that there is such a thing as the public interest and the common good, that we are all of equal worth, that the world should be free and fair. The founding editors of Guardian Australia knew we couldn't cover all of the country in the website's first days, but they were committed to providing the facts, and to quote Viner again, but not just the facts, to use clarity and imagination to provide hope. The next panel examines the core issues Guardian Australia has focused on over the past decade, areas which the founding editors felt were not well covered by established media. And if they weren't well covered, there were certainly not big solutions on the table to solve some of the country's biggest problems. Lucy Clark will now lead a conversation looking at Guardian Australia's coverage of politics, Indigenous affairs, environment and climate, and inequality. Please welcome Lucy Clark, Katharine Murphy, Laura Murphy-Oates, Adam Morton, and Luke Henriques-Gomes to the stage.
Thank you, Gabs, for that introduction, and good evening and welcome to everyone to a panel discussion tonight about the pillars of Guardian journalism and the impact that we've made over 10 years. We're joined tonight by political editor Katharine Murphy, climate and environment editor Adam Morton, host of our flagship podcast, The Full Story, Laura Murphy-Oates, and our social inequality editor, Luke Henriques-Gomes. I'm going to start tonight with Katharine Murphy, who was there at the very beginning. Murph, I believe you were employee number 3.
Why wasn't I too?
That was Lenore. Murph, you and Lenore took the leap from Fairfax, then Fairfax, now Nine Entertainment, to take the chance on The Guardian in Australia. What amazes you most about the fact that we're on stage here now celebrating this milestone?
Well, thank you, Lucy, but what amazes me most is that we're here. If that sounds sort of extraordinarily pessimistic, that's not really what I mean. I just would encourage people in the audience tonight to cast their minds back to 2012, which was the year before Guardian Australia launched, and it was the most traumatic year I have ever spent in journalism, 2012. It was the year where, the internet hit business models here exceptionally hard and also around the world. Serious newspapers were closing. There were mass redundancies here and in newsrooms around the world. Honestly, at that time, I thought journalism had 5 years to live. That was my working assumption, that we had 5 years, maybe 10 if we were lucky. So it really genuinely, for me at that time, Lucy, felt like it was 5 minutes to midnight. And when you're at 5 minutes to midnight, you want good company, don't you? You don't want to be with, the most boring person in the bar at 5 minutes to midnight, do you? So we were extraordinarily lucky that The Guardian was scouting in Australia at the time where I really felt all or much hope was lost. And I was attracted to The Guardian for a number of reasons. I think predominantly because the organisation appeared to be holding its nerve in one of the biggest structural adjustments that I had seen in my professional lifetime. The Guardian felt to me like a place where core journalistic values that I had devoted my professional life to upholding would be upheld, and that was not the case, sadly, in all media organisations, not because they were terrible, but because literally we were in freefall at that time, and I think a lot of editorial managers just didn't know what to do. So I think when I say I can't believe we're here, that's what I mean, because launching at that time was extraordinarily audacious, just unbelievably against the trend everywhere. And so I thought if it's to be death, then I'll die with people I respect and die doing the sort of journalism that I want to do. And by, some miracle, which is not a miracle, by exceptional editorial leadership of two women particularly who are in the audience tonight, Katharine Viner and Lenore Taylor, very sound commercial strategy, a whole lot of nerve, a whole lot of craziness. It's sort of like being in a caper movie. The last 10 years of my life, it's been extraordinary, really. Somehow, through the combination of all of those things, we got there.
But politics was obviously the very first pillar of journalism that had to be put in place to build The Guardian. Why was it so important to get that right first?
Well, I think, I was chatting to my daughter earlier this week to explain that I was coming to this anniversary event and that it meant a whole lot to me to be sitting here, acknowledging this milestone. And, I said to my daughter, who, suffered a lot of neglect as a consequence of this passion of mine, this is really important to me, that we did this. And my girl said to me, well, sure, Mum, well, we can't leave it all to ATN, can we? So, okay, that's the relief that you watch Succession. You're all fellow Succession tragics like me. If you don't watch Succession, ATN is the Fox News, the sort of mythical Fox News in the Succession series. Anyway, I just thought that was a very pithy thing for my girl to say. But obviously Lucy's question was about politics. Why politics? Why the centrality of politics? Well, I think, I think people who understand the media market in Australia know that it is very concentrated. A lot of it is sort of right-leaning. Certainly Lenore and I knew what we wanted to achieve if we were given an opportunity to work in an organisation that shared our journalistic mission and values. I think we wanted to be fast and fierce. I think we wanted to basically uphold the journalism that we had done through, the golden age of print, which is be fast, be accurate, be authoritative. We wanted, to sort of give the audience policy depth through lucid translations, through whatever format that happened to be it sort of like a digital format or my podcast, which I happen to love, or through video or on social. We sort of wanted policy depth, lucid translation that would engage an audience. And so we sort of, we kind of set ourselves on that mission. Politics, I've sort of devoted my life to reporting on politics because it is the human condition. It's the best anthropology going, political reporting. And we just thought that we were losing our way a bit with how we reported politics, that we were sort of straying from some of the core values, and we wanted to sort of grab the new formats, digital formats, to sort of emphasise our values. And we also wanted to do a couple of things that were a bit novel, show our methods to audiences. What that means is not only produce the news content and the analysis, but where possible, be self-reflective and reflect on how we've got to certain propositions. And we sought ways of doing that early in the piece as part of a sort of trust-building exercise with audiences. And also one of the most gratifying things for me over the decade has been, when we started, it was Lenore and me typing sort of, 14 hours a day at our made-up desk at the back of the Channel 10 studio in the press gallery. It was kind of all insane.
Is it true you shared one chair?
Well, look, only on bad days, Lucy. Only on bad days. It's sort of. I'll just tell one quick Brian story because it'll make Lenore laugh if no one else. We occupied this space in the Channel 10 bureau because no one in. Basically we got locked out of the press gallery when we launched. But lovely Hugh Riminton, the Network 10 political editor at that time, gave us some space in the tech office in the Network 10 bureau. And Lenore and I shared a desk, one desk. Sometimes we'd come in and there was only one chair, which was a little bit awkward. We shared a room with Brian, who was the tech guy from Network 10, lovely man. Lenore and I did a lot of really fast, frenetic work and a lot of crying during that period. And Brian, who was initially sort of horrified when we turned up in his man cave, became so familiar with us over time that when Lenore and I would go on one of these crying jags, he would just simply hand us the box of tissues and go and put the kettle on. So it actually proved to be very nice. But anyway, I'll wrap up quickly though.
Bless you, Brian.
We've built a bit of bless Brian, seriously. But we've built from that two-woman crazy operation to the team that I now run in Canberra, who are the most exceptional, fantastic group of young people. And, you know, politics is that environment is great for nurturing new voices. And you guys are all regular readers, so you know how fantastic my team are.
Adam, I'll come to you now because after the Canberra team was in place, obviously climate and environment was the next vital area that had to be bedded down. You were not yet with us, but the Guardian's reputation in environmental coverage preceded you. What were you seeing from the outside before you came in?
Yes, I was on the outside looking in at Fairfax at the time, but paying attention, close attention. The Guardian obviously arrived in Australia with a really formidable and hard-earned reputation as a global leader in climate change and environment journalism. And we knew that at Fairfax because we ran their stories in our newspapers until Guardian Australia turned up and took them away. But like, for one example, I'd been to United Nations climate conferences, COPs, and it really felt there like the Guardian had the squadron of journalists that was dwarfing what others were doing, often setting the news agenda for the rest of the media and sometimes for the talks themselves. So, yeah, big expectations with The Guardian coming to Australia, and then you could immediately see with the team that was being hired, that was very small and we didn't have that inside view of just how, relying on Brian for tissues. But the political reporters that had been hired, Lenore and Murph, were not only terrific political journalists, but journalists that put climate change on the highest rung of issues that needed attention, which I think it's fair to say wasn't a universal view in Canberra at the time. And there was also in the original small team an environment reporter, Oliver Millman, who's now with Guardian US. So the intention was clearly there. And this came at a time in which, as Murph said, 5 minutes to midnight, but environment journalism in Australia was contracting significantly. Fairfax had deep cuts and went from, I think, someone may correct me, but that at one point across 3 mastheads there were 6 or 7 environment journalists, and it went back at one point to 1.5 before rebounding. The ABC had made similar cuts. News Corp was kind of doing what News Corp does now, I guess, but for The Guardian to land in that moment and say, no, this is a frontline issue, and the environmental issues are top of priority for us, was, I think, really a moment in Australian journalism, and over time played a role in things sort of turning around.
What do you think sets the coverage apart? I mean, I know we've talked about both sidesism, for example, and how we deal with that. Well,
that was obviously, one of the noteworthy things about The Guardian from the outset was that there would be no both sidesism. It was, a factually framed pursuit, right? What's the evidence say? Oh, well, maybe we should put that at the heart of our journalists rather than just what the last person we spoke to said. A really radical idea, I guess. But one of the things not only was... not only The Guardian do that, it also would call out the both sidesism, which, I thought was really noteworthy.
That goes back to what Murph said about showing the working.
That's right. That's right. But I think in terms of, what we have done over the journey, and I'll co-opt the we for the period I was not here as well, there's like a general answer and then a range of specific ones. But the general answer is just really comes down to cross-organisation relentlessness that prioritises these issues as really important. And that comes across editorial from Lenore down and across commercial. Everyone in the organisation knows they're signing up to doing work that prioritises climate and environment as central to what we need to be reporting on and central to our lives, right, and the lives of our readers. So, like, essential work. And, you know, that's not yet a universal idea in journalism, I don't think. We are very lucky to have a team of 4 specialists working across climate, environment and science. And shout out to Lisa, Graham and Donna, who are here somewhere, my colleagues. We can do what we do because of what happens elsewhere across the newsroom and the support we get. You know, these issues are central to what Murph and the team does in Canberra, central to our economics and business coverage, central to our rural affairs coverage, transport, lifestyle coverage, and I could go on. And I think this is, you know, the way that it should be, but I do not take it for granted. Couple of specific examples I'd just like to give, and I draw from a range, but in 2018, before I was on staff, Lenore commissioned I think, you know, really kind of innovative project called Our Wide Brown Land that asked readers to chip in and say, this work's important to you, can you, if you can afford it, give us some money to support it? We met our initial target on day 1, we doubled it within a matter of days, and then that funded a range of deep investigations over the next 18 months on issues like failing national environment laws, plastic pollution, extinction crisis, deforestation, water rights. A lot of those issues weren't getting attention then. A lot of them are getting a lot more now. That's not just due to The Guardian, but I think it plays a role. You know, you can't measure how much... there's no empirical way to test what impact The Guardian's work has, but smarter people than me outside the organisation, some of whom are here tonight, tell me they think that it has made a difference in what the media as a whole focuses on and what is at the centre of political debate. And I think that's probably right, as much as I can judge that. So, you know, the message is that this matters and people did really care. And then one particular example, there's been a range of investigations, but Lisa Cox's work on environmental offsets in New South Wales, showing the systemic failure in that system, which has triggered a whole bunch of inquiries and hopefully a result from the new government in the next few months in changing that system, just sort of goes to the sort of work that we do and hope to continue to do.
Thanks, Adam. So Laura is very kindly stepping in tonight for our Indigenous Affairs editor, Lorena Allam, who is in the Northern Territory at an historic meeting. It's 6 years tonight since the Uluru Statement from the Heart was delivered to the base of Uluru, and she's there tonight. The architects of that statement are gathered, and Lorena will be covering that story for us, and you can read about it in The Guardian tomorrow. But Laura, Guardian Australia's record on Indigenous affairs was established really early on from the outset with Katharine Viner, our founding editor, established a partnership with Luke Pearson and Indigenous X, and we were publishing Indigenous voices from the very beginning on a weekly basis, which at that time was a really unusual thing for a mainstream media organisation. It was also part of the reason you wanted to join The Guardian, right?
Yeah, Indigenous X and our Indigenous Affairs coverage in general. I was actually an Indigenous X contributor when I was at SBS, and it was published in The Guardian then, which I was very excited by. But when I was leaving SBS and NITV, which was my first job, 6 years there, I was really looking for a place that, one, felt safe for an Indigenous journalist. I think we've heard a lot this week about Australian media's problem with safety for Indigenous journalists, and part of what made The Guardian feel safe is how fearless some of the coverage was, but also thoughtful and respectful. Just before I started, there were two projects that really exemplified that for me. One was the killing times, which mapped massacres across Australia in collaboration with Newcastle Uni that Lorena headed up with a broader team, and kind of told the stories of the descendants and of the massacres and how those massacres really reverberate today for families and communities, lead to tangible things like distrust of the government, distrust of the health system, fear walking around communities to this very day. And the other project was Deaths Inside, which actually tracked Aboriginal deaths in custody since 2008 and gave a number to that, which was a number that we didn't have. When I was at NITV, I wish we had that number, because it was evidence of what was going on inside our justice system. And I think both those two projects for me just showed, I suppose, a fearlessness in uncovering some of the lies that are at the heart of this nation. That, we had a peaceful settlement of Australia and that it was a long time ago, and none of that really impacts how our society works today, which is just completely false. So that was really inspiring for me to join. And then, I've been hosting the podcast and contributing to our Indigenous Affairs coverage via that as well. We often cover these topics, not as only on NAIDOC week or Reconciliation week, but day in, day out, week in, week out. But also got to work with Lorena on a special project called Childhood in Custody, where we spoke to people who work within the justice system about why Indigenous kids are so overrepresented in that system. And kind of looking at the issue of raising the age, which Australia is so far behind even other democratic countries, but also non-democratic countries who have a criminal age of responsibility much higher than Australia at 14, which is 10 in most jurisdictions. And we've seen a big shift in that in the past year or so.
Deeply impactful series. Luke, you've got a really strong sense of the way we cover inequality as well and what sets us apart. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I think so. So as Adam was talking about, this sort of sense of relentlessness, I think, and Laura was talking about just covering things on NAIDOC week or the like, in terms of inequality and particularly issues of poverty and the welfare system, issues that have been either ignored or, I guess, the people who are in those systems have been demonised in the media for so long. We feel like those are issues that shouldn't just be discussed through a political lens or, talked about when, the government's doing something new in welfare policy, for example. They're issues that we want to cover all the time and prioritise and give voice to, I guess, people who are marginalised, people whose voices are usually crowded out of the media, out of the political debate, or when you do hear from them, you only hear from them because they're being demonised, as I said. So I think centering the voices of the people whose circumstances we write about is so crucial for me and for my colleague Stephanie Combry as well. It's not just because it's a good thing to do or a nice thing to do, but because it makes the journalism better. And I think for the readers, having people with lived experience at the centre of those stories, whether it's in a news story or the comment pieces and series we did like Life on the Breadline, it makes it so much more powerful. And then also, the fact that we really try not to let up on issues. I think if we think about the Robodebt story, which Chris Norse really did lead the reporting on that when that story broke in late 2016. And it was a big political story for a period of time in 2017. And then kind of, I think for a lot of outlets, kind of lost its shine. It dropped off the map, really. And I think at The Guardian and in our team, we're allowed to just keep pursuing those stories. We're encouraged to do that. And having, worked at other places, that's not the case.
It's not always
and
the case.
Looking at, other outlets, that's not always the case. If a story sort of is no longer flavour of the month, it sort of drops off the media cycle. And I guess we sort of feel like it's our job to put it there and to get people to think about it and to get people to know what's happening in those stories. And, we're still covering that story today. And it's because we're encouraged to do that.
Yeah. We are going to be wrapping up soon, but I want to come to each of you and ask you, there's so much that goes on behind the scenes with stories that our readers don't get to hear about, and I know that there are always, really poignant, momentous, personal moments where you feel that, the mission of our work is really important. Do each of you have a story you'd like to share? Adam's microphone is up. It's a yes. You can go first.
I have some arcane interests, Lucy, and one of them is UN climate negotiations. But it's an arcane interest I share with a couple of other people at Guardian Australia. And in 2021, we decided to do a podcast. Started a meeting with my colleague Graham Redfern and with Lenore Taylor, looking at Australia's role in international climate talks and the international effort to combat the climate crisis. And that became what was called Australia versus the Climate. And putting it together was a rewarding, but by such a massive distance, the most exhausting professional thing I've done in my life. I think we did more than 30 hours of interviews with former prime ministers, ministers, international leaders, insiders and outsiders of the climate talks, and then turned that into about 5 hours of multi-part podcast that was kind of part climate story, part political intrigue, part soap opera, I guess. But I did wonder at the end, this will be great for a few dozen people who care about this stuff, and we've had a good time, but I'm not really sure whether that's something that's going to be of interest to a mass audience. And it was a really cross newsroom effort. Everybody had put it, I can't tell you how many people, and I couldn't list them because I'd miss people, had put effort into pulling this thing off and went, exhausted themselves in the end. And then I thought, that's been fun. Let's see how it goes. And when it went out, it got a reaction that I really didn't expect, in that it was incredibly well received and pushed the Full Story podcast to the top of the news podcast charts.
Thank you, Adam.
And my point is not that a self-aggrandisement so much as that it is, I thought, a great evidence of two things. One, what this organisation can do when people pull together and really put in, and it was no one person's work. And two, the audience is really there for this stuff. People really care. If you put the time in and tell the stories well on climate change and environment issues, I would argue the biggest stories of our time, people do care and they will engage. And so that was a really affirming moment and the sort of thing we want to do more of.
Yeah. Laura?
For me, I would say it was 2020 when the Black Lives Matter movement, or rather the protests, hit Australia. It was more deaths in custody protests here in Australia. It was really significant for me because I've been to some of these deaths in custody protests for years and years and years as a video journalist at NITV, rocking up with a bunch of equipment and not really knowing what I was doing. And sometimes there were a dozen or so people there. You got to know everyone very well, elders and Aboriginal community members and the Socialist Alliance. And over the years, you saw more and more people coming, but then suddenly in 2020, there was this protest where thousands and thousands and thousands of people turned up. I just never seen anything like it. And at that protest, people were holding signs saying 432, which is the number of Aboriginal deaths in custody since 1991, the Royal Commission, and a number that had been documented by The Guardian. And at 432, the city went quiet and everyone kneeled for a minute's silence. And it was very personally impactful for me. It felt like everyone had rallied behind something that we'd hoped they would for a very long time. It felt less alone.
Thanks, Laura. Thank you. Luke?
I think I remember when I first started reporting on inequality in 2018, I put a call out on Twitter to people. I just wanted to hear their experiences, particularly people living in poverty, people dealing with the welfare system in Australia. I didn't know what would come back. I kind of thought, oh, maybe I'd get some stories, but also I just wanted to sort of get a sense of how to think about these issues when I'm covering them, and thought, well, why not speak to people who are, I guess, impacted. I was blown away by the response. That it was really huge. So many people sent me a DM with really personal stories, really opened up and shared parts of their lives, talked about issues as well, which were things that I could then go on and write about, but also just sort of shared parts of themselves with me. And that's kind of been those conversations have sort of continued throughout the time I've been doing this job, and we've had the Inequality team. And it's been really gratifying, I think, that people are willing to do that. But I've also just been so inspired and, I guess, in awe of people who, as I mentioned before, like, it's not only is it not easy to, for example, be, in the welfare system in Australia, like, there's demonisation and stigma attached to that, and people who are willing to share a part of their lives with me and trust us to share that with the readers and the broader public, like, that takes so much courage. And it's just, I just really, I'm always moved by people who are willing to take that chance and do it because they think it might make a difference.
And some of them support us, right?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, it's like a bit emotional when I, sometimes get a message from somebody who's on the job seeker payment or on a really low income, on a fixed income, who will send a screenshot of a contribution that they've made because they appreciate that we write about these issues, and we do it, more so than other outlets, and we do it in the way that we do it. So, yeah.
Thanks, Luke. Murph?
Just quickly, because I know we'll be right on time, just Luke mentioned there courage and people who need us to turn up for them and try and move the dial for them. One of the most gratifying personal experiences I've had as a political reporter was what happened in Parliament's Me Too moment. I don't want to get into specifics, personalities, but all I would say is that there were women in Parliament House who needed a bunch of us to show up for them and keep showing up, whether or not the Prime Minister was delighted to hear from us or not. And, a lot of what I do is about, sort of trying to remove the poison from the conversation, to borrow from Stan Grant this week, or to collaborate with colleagues to try and elevate things that are really important and put them before readers to serve readers. But during that experience, it was a deeply human thing that happened. And I've never felt more motivated in my life to continue standing up for people who needed the culture in the building to change. And I think through the bravery of some women who were prepared to tell their stories, and through relentlessness has been another word that we've shared tonight, through the relentlessness of the reporting around those issues, I think we made a difference.
So we really are out of time, but very, very quickly, I think it's really important that we just finish on The Voice tonight, which is it's a massive moment in Australian history and something we are thinking a lot about, obviously, at The Guardian. Laura, just very quickly to finish this off, can you just tell us about what guiding principles keep us on this track?
Yeah, one of the main principles that I've seen in Lorena's coverage, and she's spoken to me about, is centering First Nations voices. I mean, if we get to the end of this process and we have a bunch of white talking heads talking about the referendum non-stop, then what was the point, And she's kind of exemplified that approach with the Voices on the Voice series. It's opinion pieces going out, much like Indigenous X, from people all around the country, elders, young people, experts, etc. And we're hoping to replicate that in audio form later this year with a podcast on The Voice that is still in development, so I won't say too much, but keep an eye out for that. And then the other thing is just sticking to the facts and not putting out ideas without context, not just repeating falsehoods that are being laundered in the media and by some politicians. There's a real uptick in misinformation that we're seeing already, and it's only going to get worse leading up to the date. And there are parts of society, the No campaign, who are looking to capitalise on that. There's, you know, the saying, if you don't know, vote no, that they're pulling out. But if you don't know, there's so many things that you can go and read on The Guardian. You know, if you look at the Indigenous Voice to Parliament tag, there's hundreds of articles, including evergreen explainers about what The Voice is and what it will do. There's books, there's so many things that you can look. We all, as Lorena said on the podcast this week, need to be fact checkers and really go to trusted sources like The Guardian if you don't know.
Thank you, and we really do have to wrap up. Thank you very much, everyone. Say thank you.
I don't know if she remembers this, but early in Lenore Taylor's tenure as editor, I asked her when she would feel Guardian Australia was truly a success. She didn't hesitate. She said when it has a consistently significant influence on public debate. I remembered that conversation earlier this month when I read her 10th anniversary essay. In it, she wrote about her concerns when Guardian Australia started, how the naysayers said we'd never make it, and her pride that we're now a player. A chill went down my spine when I read this paragraph. We have set our own tone, unashamedly progressive but never partisan. We seek to report for the powerless and the people subjected to the exercise of power, not in the interests of those who wield it. We try to listen and understand the experience of our readers and help them make sense of the world as it is. And we strive to find ideas about how we can act to create a better one. That belief that we can create a better world is something that I think unites Guardian staff, our readers, subscribers, supporters and partners, and no doubt what brought many of you here tonight. So thinking about that, once again, get those phones out. Didn't think it was over, did you? I want to think about the future now and about our hopes for the future. So instead of just one word, you might get two in this one because it's a bit harder. But if you can put one or two words in about what your hopes are for the next decade, and just think about that. We'll talk about it at the end of this next session. After you've entered your words, you can only put one or you can put up to three. You can also have the opportunity to ask Lenore and Kath some questions at the end of that session. And now to the next panel. You'll now hear from the inspiring women whose leadership and determination are the reason that Guardian Australia exists and is thriving today. I don't think they need an introduction at this point, but Katharine Viner is the Guardian's global editor and Lenore Taylor is Guardian Australia's editor. They're joined in conversation with Guardian Australia's opinion editor and one of our original staff members, Bridie Jabour.
Hello. I assume that welcome was for Lenore and Kath. As always, I'm just happy to be here. Guardian Australia began in 2012, didn't launch then, began as a suggestion from then Communications Minister Malcolm Turnbull to then Editor-in-Chief of Guardian Alan Rusbridger and philanthropist Graham Wood. That crazy suggestion, and it was a crazy idea at the time, turned into a reality when then Deputy Editor Kath Viner was sent to Australia to launch it in 2013. Kath, you came here. I don't think you had any friends here. You certainly had no family here. You'd been here a few times as a tourist. She'd been to Grafton. My
For the
hometown.
Jacaranda Festival.
How do you launch a news outlet coming in cold like that?
Yeah, no family, not even any friends, as you say, Bridie, which is quite a big achievement there. No, Well, I decided if I was going to do it, I was going to be all in. And so I set myself this task. I had a good 6 months before launch, which is a really amazing amount of time. And so I had this rule that I could only read Australian novels, I could only watch Australian TV and listen to Australian radio and movies and so on. And I got completely obsessed. I really enjoyed that process and really got into it, and I still carry on doing lots of that today. And then I also, because my whole task for that 5 or 6 months was, what is Guardian Australia going to be? I decided just to meet as many people as I could to ask them that question. What could the Guardian be in Australia? What would the Guardian look like with an Australian accent? Met so many interesting people, some of whom we hired, it was just a sort of pure pleasure, really, that period, and I really look back on that really happily.
And it was met with scepticism in Australia as well. Lenore, you were hired, one of the first people, as we heard before, hired. You had a big job at the time, one of the biggest jobs in Australian journalism, chief political correspondent at the Sydney Morning Herald. You came to be the launch political editor. Did you think that some of the scepticism had a point, that maybe there were risks to it?
Sure, it was a huge risk. It was an enormous risk. I mean, if you think back to that time, Murph sketched out some of the immediate challenges there with the digital platforms, and there was sort of mass sackings at the time. It was also the time when Gina Rinehart was trying to take control of Fairfax. And also, we had been banging on about the concentration of media ownership in Australia for years and years and years. And, even Malcolm Fraser and Gough Whitlam put aside their differences and went on stage in the early 90s to talk about the importance of trying to have a more diversified media, trying to have more media outlets. And here was an opportunity to actually do something about it. And, it was a risk. But if you were ever going to make that happen, it was this time with the incredible richness and heft of the Global Guardian brand and back office and all that content behind you. So, yeah, it was a risk. We had a shot at it, and you don't miss your shot, right?
Kath,
You don't.
But we did. We had to kind of smash our way in. Like, people didn't think it would work, and we had to make a big noise and be really fight our way into the media landscape. It was by no, it sort of looks established now, but it wasn't easy.
Did you have any dark nights of the soul, Kath, during that time?
A lot. Actually, I remember the night that I made the offer to you and Murph, and we'd spent weeks, meeting in sort of dive bars in Canberra because we thought no one would see us in there, although...
Until Julia Gillard's press secretary walked in. Oops.
Who happened to be British, and I knew from London, probably one of the few people who would know all three of us. Anyway, that aside, there was a time as well, because we were in this terrible office in Wynyard that didn't have proper internet. Didn't have proper furniture, really. The walls were incredibly thin. And you kept asking to see the office, and I kept trying to divert you because I thought if they saw the office, they'd never want to join The Guardian. But that night, yes, I remember just sort of lying awake all night in this hotel in Canberra thinking... we've completely blown the budget buying these 2 stars, and is it a great risk? Is it going to work? Have I risked their careers? Have I risked my career? Will we even get off the ground? But I'm so glad. About that decision.
And of course, none of this would have happened without money from Graham Wood specifically. And what was so unique about that philanthropic setup?
Well, he gave us a lot of money, and he said, if it works...
Lent us.
Sorry?
Lent us a lot of money.
Well, it was sort of, because he lent us it, and he said, if it works, you can pay me back, and if it doesn't work, never mind. Which is literally the best loan ever. And also, he gave us the money, and then he disappeared. And he, talk about this sort of dream funder for Guardian Australia. Guardian, it was just absolutely brilliant. Graham was fantastic, and there would be no Guardian Australia without Graham. And he's here tonight, and thank you, Graham.
And we did pay him back, and he looked very surprised.
We paid him back early.
And so we launched May 27, 2013. What did you feel the impact of that launch of Guardian Australia in this country was at that time immediately? Like, did you see an impact immediately?
I mean, all I can tell you is that the traffic was massive and everybody was horrible to us, all our rivals, and so that's how we knew.
And so we skipped to 2015. Launch editor Kath Viner is now global editor-in-chief of The Guardian. Launch political editor Lenore Taylor is appointed by Kath a year later to be editor of Guardian Australia. Lenore, was that all part of your master plan?
Absolutely not. I had never really aspired to be an editor. I'd been in the press gallery for 30 years and I loved it. I loved that job. But, Kath was our launch editor. Then we had another senior editor from London and she was terrific. And then it was clearly time that Guardian Australia had an Australian editor. And I knew that it would need to be someone who also understood The Guardian in Australia. And that somewhat narrowed the field. So I put my hand up and, I kind of convinced myself that I could do this thing. And, by this stage I was very invested and I wanted the job. And I remember I was standing outside Parliament House waiting for my husband to pick me up. And there were these gang cockatoos hanging in the trees, eating these red berries really noisily. And I was kind of watching them. And Kath rang from London and offered me the job. And I sort of had this moment looking at the sunset on the cool Canberra evening of thinking, oh my goodness, this is big. This is a really big moment. And yes, that is why I go for the Gang and Bird of the Year.
You had that big moment when you knew that you got the job. What was it like when you first walked into the Sydney newsroom as editor of Guardian Australia? How did that feel?
Well, it was quite daunting. I mean, I knew how to be a political editor. I knew how to report politics. I'd actually never edited anything. I'd never managed a business. And, when you're the editor of The Guardian, you manage the business together with the managing director in Australia. That's Dan Stinton now, who's been the managing director for the last 5 years. So you need to know how to run a business. You need to know how to manage a team. I mean, these were all quite new skills for me. So I was on a learning curve. I mean, it's been incredibly rewarding and we have the most wonderful staff and I absolutely love it. But it was a bit daunting on that first day, I've got to say.
And what do you think the impact of Guardian Australia in the media landscape has been? And also, what do you think the impact on people's lives have been?
I do think that we've made a difference. I think that it was pretty apparent almost immediately that Australians really wanted a progressive voice, like a non-partisan, factual, but progressive voice, which is really like a way of looking at stories, like sort of looking at stories, I think like the quote that Gabs read out before this panel, looking at stories from the perspective of people who have power exercised upon them more than from the perspective of the people exercising the power. So it was clear that people wanted that and liked it when we gave them that perspective. I think we were not afraid. If we knew our facts were right, we didn't care if, politicians attacked us or if our rivals attacked us. I mean, goodness, they do that every other week. If we know we're right, we sort of stick to our plumb line. If we know that we are reporting factually and fairly, then, we can weather any storm. And I think, that was unusual. And I think that we did do politics differently, as Murph talked about earlier. So if you pull that all together, I think we gave Australians something different, and I think our readership says that was something that our readers wanted.
I'm just going to take this moment to remind everyone that the way to ask questions is through that app that we've been using throughout this for all the interactive stuff. So if you're thinking of questions while you're listening to them talk, put them into the app because there's not going to be a microphone at the end of this. I'm going to get sent your questions with very advanced technology called WhatsApp. But feel free to type away now and think about that. Kath, you used to talk about the Guardian-shaped hole in Australian media when you got here, and it was something we used to talk a bit about in the first few years. But with a bit of time and distance from then, your thoughts have changed on that and about whether there was a guardian-shaped hole?
I hate that phrase. I hate that phrase because it sounds like it was easy, like someone just need to gently drive into this hole and it would be fine. And in fact, we, as Lenore has alluded to, we had to be street fighters. So I think it was just that the gap was just that people hadn't responded to the digital revolution in the way that The Guardian had, and we were able to do that in Australia. That's what I would say.
Saw the chance and took it, absolutely went for it. It is crazy to think how... we all love to do that. It is crazy to think about how rickety the operation was then, and now we employ more than 160 people, and I'm sure that obviously everyone here is familiar... What?
Yeah, bravo.
Thank you. Oh, it wasn't me, it was them. So that's an extraordinary decade, but what do you see Guardian Australia doing and focusing on in the next 10 years, Lenore? Where do we go from here?
I'm really glad you asked that, because I've been sort of listening tonight, and it's fantastic to reflect on what we've done, but we ain't finished. We have got a lot more to do. I mean, to start with, many of our rivals are bigger than us. Many of them have either own or are associated with a television station and a radio station, so they can cross-promote their journalism, across all those platforms. We have geographic areas that we don't report on yet. We have subject areas that we want to do more reporting on. And I think we need to think very carefully about how we get the news to younger people, because, they're not consuming news necessarily in the same way as my generation did. But Matilda's work, for instance, shows that they still are incredibly interested in it. So it's on us to get the news to them in the way that they want to consume it. So we've got a lot of work to do, and I want to get bigger. I want to have more influence in Australia. We're not finished. I just want to make sure that nobody thinks we're complacent. We've got a long way to go.
And we still need our readers to help us do that. Yeah.
Hint, hint.
And there'll be a bucket at the door on the way out.
Kath, when you came here, so I worked on a podcast in the lead up to our 10th anniversary and interviewed a lot of people about the history of Guardian Australia and the impact of it. And one person I interviewed who was Mark Scott, who's now VC of University of Sydney, but was managing director of ABC at the time. And he spoke about you, Kath, and you coming to Australia and how he's never seen anyone not from here who understood it so well and who was also so embraced by so many Australians. Like, there were a lot of people who didn't want you here. They're all in Holt Street. But you met with everyone, every senior journalist from across many media outlets at the time. You met with politicians. Why do you ever think about why you had that connection with Australia, or why that worked so well?
You're trying to make me cry, Bridie. I haven't cried yet this week, so. No, I do feel very grateful to Australia, actually, because the minute I arrived, I did just feel like I was home somehow. And I've thought a lot over the years, and every time I come back, I feel the same way. And I've thought a lot over the years about why that was. I'm a really different person here than I am in London, believe me. I think there's just something... and obviously I know there's a class system and so on, but there's something so much more egalitarian about how Australia works, even just on a day-to-day interaction level. And that really I really, really enjoy that and appreciate that, and I'm grateful for that. So
I have to say I said this the other day to Kath, but I've never met any non-Australian who sort of understood Australia, not just intellectually, but also sort of emotionally and viscerally as Kath. And at her farewell, she knew all the words to Kaysan.
And Bridie told me that proved I wasn't Australian, because Australians don't actually know the words. I've also been to every state and territory, and you said no Australian does that either.
I haven't. We're going to throw to questions soon, so I hope that you've been sending a lot in, but I felt that I should end this panel with Lenore and give the current editor of Guardian Australia, and someone who was obviously so key to our success from day one, from before day one, the final word.
Actually, I don't want to have the final word. The reason that we're here, the reason that we do what we do is for our readers. And so, and when we hear from our readers, it's so encouraging and enriching. And so I really wanted to give one of our readers the final word. And Kath and I have been doing a bunch of media interviews this week, and we did one on radio, and there was some talk back afterwards. And one of the first reader who called in was just so wonderful. Her name was Carol. I want to give Carol the final word.
Carol in Kyneton. Hi, Carol. What would you like to say?
Hi, Virginia. Oh, look, I just want to express my incredible gratitude to Lenore and Kath and all of the journalists at The Guardian. I read it every day, and I feel as though it's one of the very few sources I can trust for honesty and proper reporting. So much journalism has gone down the drain, as Stan Grant has pointed out, and this is really close to my heart. I just get so much out of it, but also just in terms of what you just asked about the payment, I'm a 65-year-old woman on a very small part-time casual job. I contribute a little bit, but I never feel guilted about it. So you can contribute what you're able to pay, but it's very, it's gold. It's worth its weight in gold, The Guardian. So thanks for your exploration with Lenore and Kath today. I just loved hearing from them. And
I'm happy to hear that you enjoyed it, and thank you for calling in, Carol. Nice to hear from you.
Carol!
And all our readers.
Honestly, it is the Carols that allow us to keep doing what we do. Advertisers come and go. Carol is the lifeblood.
Advertisers are pretty great as well.
Yes,
Lots of
but
them
we
in the
want
room.
them to stay.
Friday.
We had the word cloud. You guys had said, sent in words about how you were feeling about the next 10 years. What did we come up with? Yes, this is kind of what I was hoping for. I was going to get extremely depressed if you all thought it was the end of the world in the next 10 years.
That's fantastic. Everyone's much more hopeful about the next 10 years than they were about their thoughts about the past 10. That's great.
How do you feel about the next 10 years?
Hope, equality, peace, climate action, fairness, happiness.
Now, I'm going to go to my technology. My Be Real's gone off. No, I'm not going to do it. This is a good question. You said you were locked out of the press gallery. I think this is going to be one for Lenore. Murph did say that earlier, but Lenore can speak to this. You said you were locked out of the press gallery. How did you break in?
Well, I mean, I think Murph was talking quite literally that nobody would give us an office. We couldn't find anywhere to work. That's why we were in the tech office with Brian doing the soldering. But it wasn't just that. I think we started when Julia Gillard was Prime Minister, then Kevin Rudd was Prime Minister, and then pretty quickly Tony Abbott was Prime Minister. And there was a period where, they didn't like the influence that we were having. Some of our early stories were quite confronting for them, particularly the one about the spying scandal that we sort of revealed that Australians had been spying on President Yudhoyono and his wife. And there was a period where the Abbott government actually tried to just stop sending us any notifications of any press conferences, send us any press releases. Or, they really literally tried to starve us out of the press gallery. It didn't work, and they kind of gave up after a while. But, it was a bit, we had to sort of fight our way in at the beginning.
Also, I just think they tried to take on Lenore Taylor and Murph, and that was just stupid from the beginning. These questions are better than my questions. We should have gone straight to the audience. How can The Guardian reach out to conservative audiences and in the process help them get rid of certain outlets' misinformation?
So we do try to sort of have a plurality of voices. I mean, I think it's a decent question though, because the media landscape is polarised, and I think reporting respectfully, reporting without vitriol or anger, means that it's more likely that even people who sort of disagree with some of the perspectives that you have are going to read that.
And of course, the biggest way that is by not having a paywall. Our readers and advertisers mean that we're able to do that. And that is a really big deal because it means everyone can access us even if they can't afford to, so including Conservative voters.
Yeah. Thank you, advertisers. And Carol. This is one's for both of you, I think, and I'd be interested to hear if you have different answers to it. Like the gang gang cockatoo moment, was there a moment or a story when you knew The Guardian was a legitimate player in the Australian landscape? See, it's making them think. Better questions than mine.
It happened quite quickly. I mean, like, say, that Indonesian spying story, that was like a few months after launch, and it dominated the debate for a long time. There were a lot of other stories early on that did that. So I could tell quite quickly that our journalism would cut through and the way that we were doing journalism would cut through. It was just a matter of trying to keep going 7 days a week, with such a small staff at the beginning. But I never doubted that what we were doing would be read and would have an impact.
Do you remember that there was the first time I went back to London and I was going back sort of, hustling for Guardian Australia and promoting it. And so we put together a video of all the times The Guardian had been mentioned in Parliament and just clipping them together. And obviously it was Guardian in an Australian accent, literally. And there were about 40 mentions. And I remember we put them all together on a video. It's still on the site, actually. And people were sort of open-mouthed about how
London colleagues were.
London colleagues were, it was the big moment when people realised we were doing something special, I think.
Media diversity is still a huge issue in Australia, obviously. The Guardian has been wonderful, but how do we get more diverse outlets in the future?
I mean, that's a tough one. One of the things that helped us over the last few years were the deals that we did under the News Media Bargaining Code, and I think that was a really fantastic public policy innovation. And I think Rod Sims is still here. I think it was a brilliant piece of public policy. But those deals did sort of stop, before the really small players necessarily got some money. I mean, it's a good question, and I don't really have an answer to it. We do collaborations with smaller organisations, and we can kind of, give them a leg up or give them more reach than they would normally get. Like, for instance, with Indigenous X, I don't know if you saw Luke Pearson, who was on the video when you came in. So we can help smaller organisations like that, but exactly how their business model could work to become sustainable, I don't really know.
I think it's a lot harder now than 10 years. Like, the landscape was very difficult 10 years ago, but a lot more difficult now to launch something new. There are plenty of radio and TV shows featuring strong right-wing opinions, I think on our radio airwaves and online as well. But there is nothing in the centre left to put progressive views. Could Guardian do a streamed daily news TV show?
Did you put this in yourself, Bridie, so you could pitch to host it?
Such foresight.
Put me on with you'd have to put on my 10-second dump button. Do you think that's something we could go into?
Look, we have expanded our multimedia team a lot over recent years, and we're experimenting with video. And I think we do need to think about how we do more more video content. Whether that's the right way to do it, whether the right way to do it is through collaboration with other platforms, it is actually like the next big thing on my to-do list, is to figure out how we amplify what we do in a better way online and through video. So I don't know who wrote the question, but if you've got any ideas, that would be great.
If you own a TV station.
Or if you happen to have
I think this is a good question, probably our last as well. It's two-parter. What was the first story Guardian Australia ever published? I'm not sure if anyone's going to remember that. But the second part was...
I do.
You do?
Well, wasn't it on launch day, the splash was my Gillard interview?
And so how did we decide to go with the Gillard interview as the splash on first day? How did that interview happen?
Because the Prime Minister was really keen to have a new media organisation in Australia, and she gave us an interview. ahead of time, and I remember we sort of did a Q&A with her. There was a whole lot of news in it, and then we sort of had some fun, and she was telling us how much she loved Game of Thrones, which was really big at the time. And then I remember the next week she was tweeting in Dothraki, which was the Game of Thrones language.
And she was out of power a few weeks later, wasn't she?
Yeah.
The second part of that was how did you decide what to cover, which is an excellent question that we didn't get into that much in the interview before. How did we decide what areas we were going to cover?
Yeah, so that was part of that project that I'm in before launch, because we had so few journalists. Bridie, you one of the first hires, but I think there were in the reporting room there were like 6-8 reporters or something. So we realised we had to be very focused. We've already talked about why we wanted to do politics differently and the environment differently and Indigenous Affairs and asylum. And they were I felt they were the areas that we could do differently, that we could make an impact with, and also acknowledging that we couldn't cover everything. We just didn't have enough people to cover everything. So we just wanted to go for impact.
And it obviously worked. We're here 10 years later. Please join me in thanking Lenore and Kath for their time this evening.
Thank you, Bridie, Lenore and Kath, and to you for those really amazing questions. There is also a special episode of Full Story that just came out tonight. So if you liked that, this is even better, I promise. Well, no, sorry, but they're both in it, so I think that's okay for me to say. It's just come out this evening, so please subscribe to Full Story now. You'll hear lots of other people as well. It's a really fun listen. And now to our final session for the evening. When I was asked to host this event, I was so nervous, and not because I was afraid of messing up in front of 500 people or my boss or her boss, no. It's because I thought, events hosts make jokes. Oh my God, I'm not a natural joke teller. So I outsourced it to ChatGPT. And this is the joke. Why did the news organisation cross the road? To get to the other side of the story. I think our comedy writers are safe. Speaking of whom, I would like to now introduce you to two of the funniest people and the most hilarious dog, whose insights delight us week after week. Please welcome photographer at large Mike Bowers and cartoonists First Dog on the Moon and Fiona Katauskas.
Few Canberra bubbles for you. These were sourced from the pristine environment of Lake Burley Griffin, so don't get it on you.
Hello, readers.
We get fabulous metrics at The Guardian every day, done by Dave Earley, who I'm not sure is here. There he is there. Fabulous man. But Dave, I'll tell you the metric that told me The Guardian had made it. My mum's 97 years old this year, and she's not what you'd call computer literate. For about 20 years, everything she saw was called the eBay thing. So if my sister would show her pictures of my kids when we were living in Perth, she'd ring you up and say, I'll show you on the eBay thing. And it didn't matter whether it was on Instagram or Twitter or it was the eBay thing. And then last year, she said to me, your sister showed me your pictures on The Guardian. They're very good. And I thought, we've made it, because a 97-year-old now thinks there's two things on the internet, the eBay thing and The Guardian. The fabulous First Dog on the Moon, who later will be performing. He's rewritten the words for Who Let the Dogs Out, and he's going to perform it for you.
You didn't do any of this in rehearsal.
Well, I kept my best material back. And the wonderful Fiona Katauskas.
I'm not going to be singing anything.
Now, when we launched I can't change with that. That's a wallet. Here it is. There we go. When we started and launched 10 years ago, where were we as a country? Well, Julia Gillard was our Prime Minister, of course, but only just, because we launched on the 27th of May, and very soon after that, this bloke, who people in the Labor Party now call Angry Santa, which is a rather good name for him, really. The number one film at the box office the week we launched was Into Darkness, which, looking back now, is a pretty... Star Trek Into Darkness, not a good omen, right? And the Bureau of Met that year added another colour to the top of the Celsius chart, which was dark purple.
It's a Barnaby Joyce colour chart.
It is,
That's coming later. That's coming later.
You're spoiling the later joke, dog. Now, I just wanted to run a little history of politicians eating. I make my bread and butter working with the fabulous Canberra team and Katharine Murphy and Sarah Martin and Daniel Hurst and Amy Henriques. And I kind of spend my time doing this sort of thing. This was 40 years ago. This is Bob Hawke. Who had a bit of a
asset.
Hey?
CIA asset.
Oh, the CIA, yes. But he had a bit of a soft spot for soft serves, did Bob. And I was lamenting when someone sent me this because you don't see it happen all that much anymore. Of course, there's no explaining Tony eating the onion or even pretending. I think the look on that little kid says it for all of us, really.
Yeah. She's thinking that's the guy who eats raw onions and doesn't know how to drink out of a children's tea set.
They don't make prime ministers like they used to.
No, they certainly don't. But Malcolm Turnbull, who had a role in The Guardian, of course, not only thought it was a good idea to eat a pie with a knife and fork, but put it on his Instagram account. Now, look
at me, Lucy. I'm a voter.
It's one thing to do this in the privacy of your own home, quite another, really, to do it and go, look, I've done this. Now, Bill Shorten was he had an unusual democracy sausage technique. He would eat it from the middle out.
Like he did with the Victorian Labor Party.
Oh.
Pancakes and Bill are a definite hard no.
And this is preparation for how he's going to deal with the NDIS, I think.
Look, eating sausages with no bread is just a definite no. There is no decent way to do this. And the high watermark for eating things, as Peter Dutton noted himself, there's just no good angle on this. Of course, if you cut like the South Australian Prime Minister, you can eat anything and no one's going to run it. They're just going to run the pictures of your chest.
That's not actually his child. He took that from a climate protester he jailed for 3 months.
Yeah, bring shame to the Lithuanians, Malinauskas.
Yes, Fiona Katauskas is a proud Lithuanian, so much to the point that I can now recognise Lithuanian names.
Yeah, I've made him develop his Litho radar, so shout out to any Lithuanians in the audience tonight. I've got tips my lead to you.
Now,
yeah,
cartoonists, plural. May the 22nd did change things for you somewhat, and it changed, of course, governments, and some handled it better than others. But first, dog, a favourite of yours was Scott Morrison.
Yeah, well, you draw him like a big sort of yellow dog. It was the thing. Scott. I mean, have we got an hour? That chicken was raw, okay? We'll go to my grave saying that chicken was raw.
Yeah. Just to show the cancel culture, I had the worst pun joke for this and they cancelled me in the rehearsal. Didn't you?
What,
cancel culture, alive.
Go on, do it.
I said, okay, I got to set it up.
Stand up.
Dog, is it true that you're illustrating a cookbook with Scott Morrison? How good is uncooked curries?
I don't know what you mean.
I hear that you're going to include Mr. Frydenberg's favourite, Rogan Josh.
Okay. Yes, we are gluttons for punishment, Mike. I can do that too.
I got more.
I
How
don't mind
about
a terrible pun?
Brief Vindamoo?
Okay. And thanks for coming, everybody. It's been really good.
Fiona, now look, Fiona, I think misses Scott Morrison as well. I think she draws him at every opportunity. But just before you start, that is her actual dog. That's Pat's.
Yeah, that is my beautiful hound. Oh, Patty, she appears in a lot of my cartoons. She wants to be in there, so I have to do it for her. But yeah, it was bizarre that Scott Morrison, he was such a strong, malignant force in Australian politics. And then it was this, suddenly all that was solid melted into air. It was this weird feeling like 5 weeks on, he was just, it was like, what the fuck was that about? There was this strange feeling of sort of,
It was a bad dream.
He just sort of vanished. It was strange.
Yeah. Well, you've got him in the bin there. First dog, the opposition leader has a very, very versatile head.
He really does. He really does, and he's great to draw. I've asked for this slide specifically to be in because this was a reference that the then Home Affairs Minister made to. Well, he didn't name me specifically, but he's talking about me and how I'm dead to him. And when I first read it, I was wondering if it was a death threat. And of course, with most politicians. But anyway, he really is he's one of those politicians who is great for cartoonists. I mean, Albanese's not particularly interesting, but you can always find an angle for that.
But the Guardian's you're dead to him, and the ABC are dead to him. I do work for both. I'm double dead to him. So as much as you're dead, I'm double
I'll say
dead.
to you now.
Oh, God. We could be possibly the deadest people
You
to
could be.
Dutton in the whole country.
This is, in fact, you may not know this is like a good episode of Talking Pictures because Mike is the talent, but you may not know Fiona produces the show, and the reason you know this isn't a real Talking Pictures is because that's one of my cartoons.
Oh, look. Anyway, just to justify, they're too long. Sorry, they're too long for Talking Pictures. Anyway, Mike.
We have 2 minutes 45 every week, and yours go for that long all on their own. Now,
see, Barnaby's upset about it too.
There are things that cartoonists can't explain, like Barnaby, right? Who can explain Barnaby? Even Ian, the climate change denial potato, can't explain Barnaby.
No, and I sitting here today, I don't think any of us really can. We may never know what it is that the voters of New England see in him, but they keep voting him back in. That's it.
I asked him what he was doing because he looked at me directly and did that, and he said, I don't know. Right. So, not even Barnaby can describe Barnaby. Now, Fiona, you've been working for the House of... For the House of Guardian Emporium, you've been working on colours.
This is a political Pantone chart with shades of Barnaby that you might recognise. And particularly the last one goes really, really well when he's in the House because he contrasts really nicely with the muted greens, like that greyish green. Sometimes you just look at it and you go, oh, wow.
It's why he had to change from the Senate, really, because he
just was blending in. They couldn't see him.
It's just like Barnaby camouflage. And we've got some Labor yellows.
Oh yeah, these are not for a portrait in Courage, just in case you're thinking of painting one. So Labor's usually in the reds, but I've given them yellows for that particular cowardice things that they do. So we've got the various, and I'd just like the strongest one at the end, offshore detention. I'm new to working for the Guardian, but I've been a long-term fan, and especially of their coverage of asylum seekers and offshore detention. Yes, sorry, our coverage. No, I'm getting to say that. Massive props to The Guardian for covering that, and especially to Ben Doherty and the other absolutely great journalists. So I just wanted to give them a cheer for that because very few media organisations still follow this story and it's so important.
Look, there's tenure in one of the yellows.
Yeah, so I think that's canary in the coal mine yellow.
It'd be much better if she was a canary in a renewable energy thing, but
they
doesn't quite work,
in
does
green
it?
Very often, do they?
No.
can you just run us through the genesis of why you're so fond of painting Peter Dutton with some sort of cadaverous cyanitis?
Oh, that doesn't come from me. This is originally from Peter Nicholson, who used to draw Philip Ruddock when he became the Minister for Immigration. There's something about that particular position that just sort of seems to suck the soul out of you. So I'm not the only cartoonist to do it. There are many, many cartoonists to do it. But also, politicians have to live up to their caricatures. So if he starts, behaving more humanely, he'll get a bit of pink in there. But unfortunately, he's got the blues for good.
Now, what's going on here, Dog? A lot of your stuff is climate change. Now, Malcolm Roberts tells me that there's no empirical evidence. So what the hell are you talking about?
Well, I mean, neither does the cassowary. Doesn't know either. No, it's really just that wonderful thing that the Guardian has been doing, again, like offshore detention and climate policy. I mean, the world's ending, but there's still a lot of fun to be had.
And the penguins are going to use that colour, right? The
yeah, absolutely. Colour. And it's, and again, a shout out to the Guardian for, I think, the commendable seabird coverage that. It really started when I got there, but I think it's been a great 9 years.
Look, various opposition members are dealing with the new paradigm of being an opposition, some better than others. Some are in various stages of denial, grief, and I just thought it'd be worthwhile having a bit of a look at the opposition treasurer, the shadow treasurer, Angus Taylor.
Now, Mr. Speaker, it's worse than that. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'll take the interjection from the member opposite because...
Okay.
Sorry.
I have waited.
Deputy Speaker.
I would loathe
I apologise.
to interrupt you, but you have called me Mr. Speaker on at least a dozen occasions. My title's Deputy Speaker. I don't need a Mr., a Mrs., a Madam. It's just Deputy Speaker.
I'll go with Deputy Speaker.
But you would have been a great
Thank
speaker.
you, Deputy Speaker. You would have been a very good speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, meanwhile, those opposite get rid of...
Well done, Angus. Good job.
Yeah, good job. Well done, Angus. That's terrific. Now, Fiona, is it a bit of a gift to cartoonists that Robodebt was called Robodebt?
Well, yeah. Well, it's one of those issues that you can sort of create. And First Dog on the Moon is brilliant at doing this, creating a character that sort of symbolises a particular issue. So yes, the Robodebt robot, and he did go through a transition from being on board with the hard stuff to then, as you can see, an encounter with the empathy coach. You never know what an empathy coach would teach you.
That's right. Now, oops, I pressed the wrong button there. That was a laser pointer. I hope I didn't blind anyone out there. Bit of a shout out to the photography department at The Guardian. We're quite a compact crew, led ably by the wonderful Carly Earle, our picture editor. We have Blake Sharp Wiggins and Ellen Smith, and you'll see Jessica Aromas running around here. There she is. And one of the great things that happened in the last few years is the establishment of the Rural Network, which allows us to tell the story of rural Australia. And it's allowed me personally, this is Gabby Chan in the front of the canoe, who's the editor of the Rural Network, and this is Kala Walquist, who both of them actually live on farms. They're the real deal. And it's allowed me to go out and just tell the stories of rural Australia, because there is a story behind every gate and in every rural town, and the health system in rural areas is nothing but a disgrace, and we should be outraged by it. And it's just been a fabulous addition to the sort of stomping patch that we've got. So I just wanted to sort of run that. Now, you guys will be shocked to know that not everyone really wanted us to succeed when it first happened.
I can't imagine.
No. Goodness me, what do you mean, Mike Bowers?
Well, CEO of Fairfax at the time, Greg Highwood, was speaking with Fran Kelly on Friday the 22nd of February, and this is what he said.
This is a bit of an asterisk in my life, actually. I mean, The Guardian...
You don't think there's a similar readership for The Guardian and for the Fairfax papers?
Oh, look, The Guardian's a good brand in London. As I sort of said somewhat glibly yesterday, it's a good brand in a few suburbs in London.
We're in a global news world now, aren't we?
Well, yeah, but there's not many global brands.
We are an asterisk to him, apparently. Now, in the words of the great Nelson Muntz from The Simpsons, ha ha. I think he's available if anyone wants to give him a job. Now, I want you to throw forward. Yeah. This is you, Albo, doing At the Crossroads. I want you to throw forward to the 20th anniversary. What will you be drawing?
Well, I think politics-wise, as the great demographer Whitney Houston said, I believe the children are our future, and I think that the younger generations will be the ones leading the way, whether or not they embrace democracy or abandon it. They've got a lot of reason to be pretty pissed off, but they are. So the only thing I'll predict is that it will be unpredictable. There, that's my cop-out.
First, I'll give, will we be an autonomous collective?
A global cartoonistocracy, hopefully. But I suspect by then we'll all be living in caves under the sea.
That'll be very hard to draw. The ink will run.
If there's lights, it will be okay.
And oxygen.
Yeah, all that too. But this is what's more fun about drawing someone like Albo. It's like, sure, you can draw people, but the real winner here, because I've been drawing Prime Minister's pets for a while now.
Can I caution you never to diss Toto, because you will be in so much trouble.
Hang on a second, isn't Toto the actual first dog?
I think he is.
Oh no, you are.
You are. Come back. You are.
Number one. Yeah. He might be first, but you're number one. Or he's not. Anyway,
ladies and gentlemen, we want to all of us three here want to thank you very much, and hope to see you at the 20th anniversary. First Dog on the Moon.
Thanks for reading.
And Fiona Katauskas.
And that, I'm afraid, is the end. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you've had as much fun as I have. For those in the room with us tonight, I'm happy to tell you that the bar is open, and if you didn't get your question asked, then we'll all be there to maybe answer them, or maybe delicately sidestep your question, depending on what it is. But to see us out, we have one last video to show you about the impact of our journalism over the past 10 years. Thank you so much for coming. Have a lovely rest of your evening, wherever you are, and thank you once again. We really, really would not be here without you. Thank you.
Guardian Australia. Writing in The Guardian last week.
Yesterday's Guardian Australia.
It took a news outlet, The Guardian, to alert the department to act responsibly.
When we launched Guardian Australia in 2013, we had to work out how to be part of the global Guardian ecosystem, but also have a distinctive Australian voice. One of the biggest stories in that first year was the Indonesian spying scandal. That was from the tranche of documents that were leaked by Edward Snowden, and it showed that the Australian government had been tapping the phone of the Indonesian President Widodo. It caused a massive diplomatic scandal and a really big rift.
The Nauru files was a cache of 2,100 incident reports from on that island, and it revealed a shocking situation.
Paul Farrell is the Sydney-based Guardian journalist the documents were leaked to.
These files are an uncompromising illustration of the more than 2 years of misery for those held on the island.
I think the most significant and long-lasting impact was that Australians realised what was happening, and Australian attitudes towards offshore processing, towards Nauru and to what was happening there changed enormously from that.
The Deaths Inside project started back in 2015 when my colleague Calla Walquist wanted to know exactly how many Aboriginal people had died in custody since the Royal Commission in 1991, and she found it impossible to get that number. We decided we should do that ourselves.
Well, I didn't believe genocide had taken place. I still don't.
The Killing Times is an interactive map that tracks all of the known frontier massacres in Australian history. What we were able to show was that there was this systemic eradication of Aboriginal people. These weren't isolated incidents. We're changing the way Australians understand their history.
I think we do investigations with a heart. We're the people who actually tell you what the politicians and business and all the power brokers don't want you to know.
In the middle of 2018, I received a phone call from a woman who wanted to report a doctor to me that had harmed someone she knew by performing unnecessary medical procedures on her. This story could easily have never been told because it involved a group of women living in a remote and regional area with very personal and distressing stories that they didn't necessarily feel brave enough initially to talk about publicly. And a lot of the calls and emails I received were from women saying, I thought I was the only one.
The climate crisis is the defining issue of our time, and for me it's the defining issue of our reporting. It sits behind so much of the reporting we do, and it is at the heart of what our environment team does.
The journalism of Lisa Cox has been absolutely outstanding.
This is really working against this global effort to address the climate crisis.
The Guardian, one of my favourite publications, I might say.
The government is killing itself in plain view. No one wins out of this.
Right from the beginning, we tried to look at politics through the prism of what it meant for people, what the policies would do, rather than the kind of inside baseball political gamesmanship of it. I think that made us distinctive from the start.
We've done what we can afford to do in this budget, Jim Chalmers said, but for people stressed about housing, grocery costs, energy bills and just everything, balance seems further and further away.
How can Australians trust this last-minute conversion when you've reneged on it in less than a week?
A judge has slammed the federal government's robo-debt scheme as a shameful chapter, a massive failure and a huge waste of money.
So I think one of the reasons robo-debt wasn't stopped was a view that welfare recipients were an easy target. Ultimately, the victims of the program were many who were vulnerable, of lower socioeconomic status, and people who often don't have a voice in the media. A lot of the reporting was only possible because of people who were willing to speak up.
Writing for The Guardian has been one of the greatest things I've ever done. I felt as if I was contributing to the world.
Do you know who I just got off the phone with? The Guardian, Emery. The Guardian.
It is time to find out which bird won Guardian Australia's 2021 Bird of the Year poll.
The Guardian Australia were the first to share our story, and now we are safe at home in below.
Some of the work I'm most proud of that we've done here at Guardian Australia has not necessarily been the biggest news stories, but the ones that have had the most profound impact on people's lives. We've campaigned and agitated for people who are unjustly detained to be freed, people released from immigration detention offshore processing, children held in adult jails finally given their liberty.
We aren't answerable to any millionaire owners or powerful moguls. We're answerable to you, our readers, and we aim to earn your trust.